name is Dan Churis. I'm the director of the Evergreen Institute, author of numerous books on sustainability, green building, living comfortably off-grid, environmental science, and many other subjects. This is the first in a 5-part series entitled, If They Invited Me to Do a TED Talk, Here's What I'd Say. In part 1, I want to talk to you about the way we think about the world. An important revelation that may help many of us rethink how we think. In our modern world, short-term thinking is king. Most of us focus on the near term. It's endemic in American politics and American economics. In fact, global politics and global economics, although there are some notable exceptions. We think a lot like mice, scurrying around looking for the next seed, hauling that seed back to our nest, living a very microcosmic world where we're focused primarily on our needs, on our immediate needs, and ways to satisfy them. To live sustainably, to succeed on planet Earth in the long run, we need to think more like a hawk, not a mouse. Say that again? What's that? We need to think like a hawk, not a mouse. We need to have perspective. We need to think holistically, to think big picture, to think systems, to understand how systems interact, how human systems interact with natural systems. We need big picture thinking. We need to think holistically. Now, there is one thing, one fundamental realization that I think will help us understand the importance of reshaping the way we think. And that's illustrated in a couple graphs. This first graph, it illustrates the growth of the human population. And you can see in the last 50 to 70 years, human population size has skyrocketed in the world. We can look at any other trend having to do with pollution or resource extraction and find the same graph. We find that growth in these activities is increasing exponentially. This graph, for example, shows global energy consumption of crude oil, coal, natural gas, and so on. And you can see it is skyrocketing, growing exponentially. This graph illustrates the global emissions of carbon dioxide. It's a few years old, but you can definitely see that carbon dioxide emissions are increasing exponentially as well. As population increases, as our way of living improves, as our economy expands. Along with that comes an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. That's carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. It too is growing exponentially, as you would expect. Along with that exponential growth of carbon dioxide emissions and carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere is an increase in global temperature, which again appears to be on an exponential growth curve. We can pretty much look at any trend, as I mentioned earlier. Here's a graph that shows the rate of species extinction in the world, and you can see it is growing exponentially as human population skyrockets. We can look at plastic production, and you can think of this as plastic waste because from this graph you can tell we recycle really only a fraction of the plastics that we consume. It is too growing exponentially. Pretty much anything we look at is growing exponentially. Population size, our economy is growing exponentially, the amount of manufacturing we do worldwide, consumption of goods and services is increasing exponentially, and along with that, there's an increase in waste production, an increase in the extraction and use of resources. Water use is on the rise, growing exponentially as the population and our economy grow exponentially. Air pollution, especially carbon dioxide emissions, are growing exponentially, as is water pollution. Along with that goes deforestation, species extinction, food consumption, loss of farmland, pesticide use, desertification, the spread of desert, largely as a result of climate change, human-induced climate change. So that's the first point, is that we're living in a world of extraordinarily rapid change, exponential change in many factors that will affect our long-term future, our survivability, our sustainability. Now here's the problem. This graph illustrates our thinking, our values with relation to space and time. You'll notice on the vertical axis, we look at space. We look at the self, family, community, state, nation, world. That encompasses the possibilities we have for viewing further and further from the self, expanding our space values. Along the bottom axis, the horizontal axis, is a representation of time values. Present, 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, eternity. Now, here's what's interesting about this graph, is that if you ask anybody where their concerns are, truly where their concerns are, you'll find that most of people are concerned with the self, their family, maybe their community, and really pretty much within the short term. So that's why we have this accumulation of dots down in the lower left portion of this graph. It's clearly an indication of where our values are, what we think about, what we plan for, what we care about. And clearly, we are pretty much focused close to home and close to now. There are a few outliers, those of us who think about the long-term future, who are concerned about the world. In fact, all the species that share this planet with us. There are those of us who are concerned about not just making it through this year, but next year, but the next 100 years, the next 1,000 years. Now, the problem is we're governing a world of rapid change with these very limited space-time values. Long-term thinking is crucial to living sustainably on the earth. For most people, long-term thinking is, hey, what's for dinner, or what's going on this weekend? Clearly for a politician, it's mostly what's for dinner, or perhaps what's even for lunch. And unfortunately for many people, beer is what's for dinner. What that leads me to is a wonderful quote from E.E. Cummings. He said, "Humanity, I love you. When times are flush, you pawn your intelligence to buy a drink." And that's part of the problem as well. Things have gone pretty well for many people in the more developed countries. And as a result, we've become complacent. We've become even more short-sighted, focusing more on personal satisfaction, fun, rather than doing the hard work of building a sustainable future. Clearly, you cannot build a long-term future on short-term thinking. This is a quote from Billy Cox. You cannot build a long-term future on short-term thinking. And I think Republicans, Democrats, and everybody in between and outside of those realms, all of us are concerned about building a long-term future, a successful long-term future. Unfortunately, we think in the short term. And short-term thinking is truly the enemy of long-term success. I like this Greek proverb. It says that a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. I'd like to modify that a little bit. I would say that a society grows great when old men, young men, women, and everybody else plants trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. So it's really all of us. So here's the problem. So here's the problem in a nutshell. We live in a world of rapid change, and it's governed by short-term thinking. And that's clearly not going to work for us. If we're going to build a sustainable future, we need to expand our space-time values. We need to think in the long term. Think about not just ourselves and our communities, but the entire world and all the species that share our planet with us. Long-term thinking is absolutely essential in a world of rapid change.
To learn more about creating a sustainable lifestyle, be sure to check out Dan's books, Survive in Style, Living Comfortably Off-Grid, The Scoop on Poop, Things I Learned Too Late in Life, and The Chinese Greenhouse at evergreeninstitute.org or lemans.com.